Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Learn Live session, where we will be going through the Enable and Manage Defender for Cloud module. My name is Lara Goldstein. I am a security product manager on the Defender for Cloud customer experience engineering team at Microsoft. I work with customers on a daily basis to help them adopt and deploy Defender for Cloud. I'm co-presenting with Sterling Davis. Sterling, can you take a second to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone, and good morning. I'm Sterling Davis. I'm a senior content developer with Microsoft. Basically, role under what's referred to as worldwide learning. This particular module is a course I'm very fond of. It's a part of the AZ500 curriculum, so it'll be an interesting session.
Definitely. Thank you, Sterling, for introducing yourself. We have an incredible moderator here today, Rod Trent. I've done one of these sessions with Rod before, and it was a blast. Rod will be answering any questions that you have related to the content that we're presenting. We also invite you to follow along with this presentation using the Microsoft Learn module. You can access it by scanning the QR code on the screen or by going to aka.ms/learnlive-2023-0412A. So you can see the banner there, so please feel free to follow along with us. And now for our learning objectives, we're going to be talking about, for our learning objectives, we're going to be talking about the most common types of cyber attacks, how you can configure Defender for Cloud, review your secure score, increase your secure score, and then protect your workloads and enable advanced security features such as just-in-time virtual machine access. All right, Sterling, over to you for a quick introduction.
Well, thank you. So, as Laura mentioned, some of our objectives that she scanned are really very appropriate with the content that we're going to be covering today. We'll be talking about Defender for Cloud and how your central location for setting and monitoring your organization's security posture is key. A given scenario, this particular module ties in with the role objective within AZ500 for the security engineer. That role will basically use the tool that we're going to be launching today to track and maintain and improve an organization's security posture, working with recommendations from Defender for Cloud, raising your secure score to keep the environment current, and to prevent underlying attacks, which is one of our use cases that we'll be exploring today. Within the AZ500 track, some of the skills that we're looking for or what that's actually measured, and hopefully this content will help you there. Being able to evaluate vulnerability scans, configure just-in-time access. Later on, Lara will be walking you through that. Configure centralized policy management. There's a very granular detail that Laura will be exploring in that area. And configuring workflow automation using Defender for Cloud. Before we start talking about that, really what sets the context of this story up is what we refer to as attacks. We mentioned earlier on that Defender for Cloud at a very high level provides some type of preventative measure and or mitigation regarding attacks. This is where this relationship with MITRE attack works with Defender, or how Defender for Cloud uses MITRE for that. You've probably noticed, I won't read to you all of the detail in this particular slide because we'll be exploring some of this here in a bit. But some points of interest that I did want to point out is in the second box, I have specifically highlighted pre-attack and initial access. Now, these are categories within MITRE that Defender for Cloud uses for awareness. At the bottom of that is kind of like how I like to think that it wraps this up. What's the whole point in this, right? Well, Defender for Cloud leverages MITRE attack matrix to associate alerts with the perceived intent. And on the right-hand side, as you can see, this is an example of what we refer to as a security attack, a security alert, I'm sorry. Specifically, this is the suspected brute force attempt attack. And at the bottom, we notice that this is what's referred to as the pre-attack stage. Actually, I'm about to explore and give you more definitions of pre-attack and initial access. And we'll go out to the dashboard and look to see how that actually looks within the context of Defender for Cloud. Pre-attack, basically the definition behind that, or to more content or context related to it, is an attempt to access a certain resource. The whole point to gather information prior to being exploited. Another example of the MITRE attack category, as we mentioned earlier on, is initial access. Well, this is a little too late because at this point, the attacker has already managed to get a foothold of the attack resource. A couple of things going along with that to help you appreciate pre-attack and or initial attack, or what we refer to as MITRE refers to as tactics and or techniques. One, in one respect, tactics addresses the why, whereas techniques addresses the how. And if you look at either of those categories, you kind of get what's going on. In one case, maybe this is why this is happening. In the other case, this is how. The example I gave you at the bottom would be if the adversary wanted to achieve credential access. Well, how are they going to do it is by performing a dump credential to achieve credential access, right? To give you an example how that would look within the context of the dashboard itself, the Defender for Cloud, what I've already done is this is launched, and hopefully this visualization isn't too large for you. But this particular window within the Defender for Cloud, this is the overview page. If you do have your own personal subscription, you can follow along. I'll try and be conscious of that and not move too fast. But where the screen capture that you saw earlier on, I had selected within the Defender for Cloud, within this particular view and this particular blade, security alerts. Something else, and I'm not going to steal too much of Laura's thunder. What comes with Defender out of the box are some of these predefined security alerts. And at your point of interest, where I want you to focus your attention, is over on the right-hand side. This is the MITRE attack categories that I opened this conversation up with earlier on, and what that was about. So what I'm looking for now, I had an idea. I may have to minimize this a little more because I can't see much of my end, but I'll expand further on. Here's an example of a pre-attack, and let's just click on it and see what kind of detail we get. Access from a suspicious IP to a storage file share. If I go ahead and launch full details, so this is defined within MITRE attack. This is a pre-attack, right? So I don't expect you to remember, but we talked about what's happening in the pre-attack stage. The attacker hasn't gained a foothold yet, right? But he's attempting to access something so he can turn around and exploit it. But some of the detail we get from MITRE, and this is the relationship with Defender for Cloud and MITRE, and it works really well. Alert details, possible causes. Again, I'm cognizant not to go too deep into this because Laura will be explaining some of this when we get to maybe workload protection, I believe. This obviously being a sample alert, how it reads if someone has access to access storage, sample storage from a suspicious IP, right? Again, this is a sample, so it's going to be a little different. But this is an example of what I was mentioning earlier on, just to expand on this to give you something to look at. If I go back to the slide deck, the next alert I wanted to just give you an example of was initial access. At this point, the attacker already has gained a foothold into the environment, right? So if I go back to my dashboard, then I could actually go back to alerts. I'm going to collapse that. And if I look for, say, initial access, again, you're probably wondering, why is he staring so hard? Only because my screen resolution is kind of large on my end. So bear with me, please. Access from a Tor exit node to storage. So at this point, the attacker has already gained a foothold towards this particular resource. And that's consistent with the MITRE initial access. So the whole point in showing you all this is to give you an idea or an example of how, hopefully to convey how Defender for Cloud, just get to the point, how does it relate to, how does it use MITRE for this? And so if I'm some type of security administrator, then I've got a lot more information to move forward with. Actually, I can use some of these take action steps. Inspect the resource content, mitigate the threat. There's specific actions that I can take. You can almost say to harden this, right? Revoke all credentials that may be compromised, ensure that they only share with authorized users and so forth, right? But that pretty much was my point to in introducing MITRE. Again, as we go into Defender for Cloud, hopefully this sets up a story, because there will be a use case at the end where Lara is able to demonstrate how Defender for Cloud can either prevent or mitigate an attack as defined by MITRE, right? So at this point, I'll hand it over to Lara.
Can we actually take a step back? I had a question there for you, sir.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, so the two alerts you showed us, they were pretty similar, right? So one was access to a storage account from a Tor exit node. The second one was access to a file share from a Tor exit node. So I'm guessing the first one would be considered pre-attack.
Correct, absolutely.
They're just accessing the storage account.
Yep.
They're not getting into the storage account. But when they get into the storage account and into the file share specifically, that's when they start moving down the kill chain and making their footprint and getting into that organization, right? And then later down, they might start exfiltrating the files. They may upload malware, and that's when we get more into the execution.
Correct.
Tactics. Got
Thank
it.
you. Thank you.
Thanks for helping clarify that. All right, so now let's talk about implementing Defender for Cloud. In this section, we're really going to talk about what does Defender for Cloud consist of? What is it? So if we go back a slide, Microsoft Defender for Cloud is a cloud-native application protection platform, or CNAPP for short, that covers the three broad pillars of cloud security: DevOps security management, cloud security posture management, and cloud workload protection for Azure, Amazon Web Services, or AWS, Google Cloud Platform, or GCP, and on-premises resources. We're going to talk about all three of these areas. We're going to start next with talking about Defender for DevOps to cover DevOps security management. So Defender for DevOps is a plan within Defender for Cloud that offers comprehensive DevOps security management and unified visibility across multi-pipeline environments, including GitHub and Azure DevOps. Defender for DevOps empowers security teams to understand where code vulnerabilities exist. It enables the security of infrastructure as code templates and container images to minimize misconfigurations from reaching production in the first place. And it unites contextual security intelligence from code to cloud to prioritize remediation through integrated workflows. Next, we have Cloud Security Posture Management. With Cloud Security Posture Management, or CSPM, Defender for Cloud gives you visibility into the different resources that you have connected over to Defender for Cloud, whether these are on-premise in Azure or on a public cloud like AWS or GCP. For each resource, Defender for Cloud is going to show you its current security situation and provide hardening recommendations based on any identified security findings. The hardening guidance is going to come with actionable remediation steps for any misconfigurations or vulnerabilities that were detected, so you can quickly and effectively increase your security and reduce your attack surface. And then the last pillar we have is Cloud Workload Protection, or CWP. Microsoft Defender for Cloud offers advanced intelligent workload protections that are available for different types of resources within your cloud environments, like storage accounts with Defender for Storage, or servers with Defender for Servers. For each of these plans, Defender for Cloud offers security alerts that are powered by advanced behavioral analytics and Microsoft Threat Intelligence, which is collecting trillions of signals every single day to really get a holistic view of the security ecosystem, so we can truly help combat cyber attacks and protect against any sort of known threats. You can also see here that Defender for Cloud includes different threat protection capabilities for virtual machines, SQL databases, containers, the network layer, and more. So that would be on number 3. We have all of those advanced capabilities. We have vulnerability assessments and tools such as adaptive application control and file integrity monitoring. You can see the status of the resources within your subscription, and you can select any of those buttons over under 3 to actually configure the specific protection type. And then lastly, Defender for Cloud is giving you insights into any sort of pressing security matters that are relevant to you on the Insights panel, which is on number 4 in this slide deck. You can see your most attacked resources and any sort of critical security alerts that you would be facing. That's the basic overview of Defender for Cloud. So now let's talk about what happens when you actually want to deploy it. So you might already be a little bit excited about Defender for Cloud. You may, if you're like me, you may be thinking this is so awesome. Let's talk, what does this cost? So we're going to talk about my least favorite topic now, which is licensing. So for Cloud Security Posture Management, we do have 2 offerings for Cloud Security Posture Management. The first offering is Foundational CSPM, which is completely free, and it offers basic capabilities so you can understand your cloud asset inventory, get guided remediation steps to fix any misconfigurations, and leverage different sorts of automations to automatically remediate these security findings. The advanced offering is called Defender CSPM. Defender CSPM provides, if we can go back just a second.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
No worries. Defender CSPM provides comprehensive visibility through agentless scanning, real-time security assessment, and contextual cloud security that includes attack path analysis based on an intelligent security graph. This graph is unifying posture insights from code in Defender for DevOps and runtime cloud workloads covering servers, containers, databases, storage, and more. We're even integrating data signals from Defender External Attack Surface Management for monitoring internet exposed resources and doing data sensitivity scanning using Microsoft Purview's information types, labels, data context, to automatically identify where sensitive data resides and help you prioritize issues that could result in a data breach. And then we also have regulatory and governance capabilities, so you can monitor your compliance with key industry standards and frameworks and assign different recommendations to different users in your organization for them to remediate. So that is where we have more advanced capabilities with CSPM alone. The next area is for cloud workload protection. And here we call these the enhanced security features. These are all available for a free 30-day trial for you to test, and they're all enabled through the environment settings blade in Defender for Cloud for any Azure subscription. And if you create a connector to bring in your AWS or GCP workloads, you would be able to enable these enhanced Defender plans from there as well in that connector. We have resource-specific Defender plans for servers, app services, databases, storage, and containers, so we can provide real-time threat detection and protection capabilities. And then we also have breadth threat protection for all of your resources that are connected to Azure through Defender for Key Vault, Defender for Resource Manager, and Defender for DNS. We have unique visibility into the Azure management layer and the DNS layer, so we can protect any cloud resource that is connected to those layers, which for Azure Resource Manager, that's all of your Azure resources are going to be connected to Azure Resource Manager, because any sort of create, update, delete operation has to go through there. So we can monitor all of those operations and let you know when we detect something malicious. Maybe someone is making permissions that are permission changes that are a bit unusual, or they're logging in from a known malicious IP address. We'll give you an alert using that workload protection plan. All of these plans are offered a la carte, so you can choose to enable Defender for servers to protect your virtual machines, but maybe not Defender for containers to protect your Kubernetes services. Of course, we would never recommend that, but it's basically just to say that they're all separate offerings, so you can enable one and not the other. And they're all offered at different prices and follow a pay-as-you-go model, so you're only paying for what you use. If you enable Defender for servers on a subscription that only has one server on for 1 hour of the entire month, you would pay 2 cents for that month because we are charging on an hourly basis. And when you do enable it from this page, it happens on the Azure subscription level. So all of the resources within the subscription will inherit the protection. What we just covered here is how you can enable Defender for Cloud plans on your Azure subscriptions, but you can also expand coverage to on-premises or multi-cloud through connecting your clouds and installing a tool called Azure Arc, which I'm going to hand it off to Serling to discuss now.
Thank you, Lara. Yeah, so the way I like to segue the cloud security posture management and cloud workload protection, let's just say the example may be, or the scenario may be, that's all Azure native, right? Well, just a few years ago, we saw a move in the industry where customers wanted to be a more, they wanted to spread their resources and rather than putting all of their eggs in one basket. Hence, we have maybe a requirement or capability to extend some of that into a multi-cloud domain. But you know what? What about those areas that maybe a virtual private cloud domain, maybe hybrid, maybe on-prem? Well, that's where we can talk about Azure Arc. So Azure Arc, as this particular figure in the slide kind of like conveys, I'm able to manage externally from Azure as if those resources were in Azure from a single pane of glass. I have a reach into a multi-cloud domains. And what do you mean by that? That would be Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud Platform. Hopefully, by minimizing the slide, I can also give you a brief example of how I've already done that. My production environment is literally, I connected that to AWS. I instantiated an EC2, that's an elastic compute 2. It's basically a virtual machine. All that had to have been done in advance on that site. So initially I had to create this Amazon Web Services account, instantiate the VM, and created a network and resources and stores and the like. Then I came back into my Azure dashboard, and I was able to launch that or continue to extend my foundational features is what I have enabled right now into AWS. I could have also done the same thing with GCP. When you look at the picture on the top, there's a couple of things going on here. We have Azure Stack Hub, we have Azure Stack Hyperconverged Infrastructure, and there's a little cloud in the back. So there's a scenario, it's considered on-prem. Guess what? You know, if a use case may be that particular client or that customer wants to keep certain content specific to their environment. It could be a service provider, a wireless service provider. So they're managing that wireless network infrastructure across their virtual private infrastructure. But you know what? What about DevOps, proof of concepts and demonstrations and trade shows? I could probably push that to a multi-cloud. There would be a possible use case for that. And there's a myriad of those, right? I don't even have the time to really to talk about the breadth and depth of that. But nonetheless, what's pretty real today is that you can not only extend Defender for Cloud services or features like Laura mentioned that was foundational, or enhance cloud security posture management features over into a multi-cloud, but you can also extend that to on-prem. And I've been asked this before, what's the difference between on-prem hybrid? The industry has used that terminology loosely so much. Hybrid environment, why? Because I'm probably able to support physical and virtual machines, right? Hence the word hybrid. As with HCI or Azure Stack Hyperconverged Infrastructure, that's an execution environment, much like Azure, as is VMware's vCenter. It's another execution environment. Again, that supports a cloud, but nonetheless, with Azure Arc, I have the capability to provide to extend that protection into those environments as if they were sitting on an Azure native environment. And then obviously with the presence of IoT, there's also requirements for that, Internet of Things, sitting out at the edge. All those devices can be protected and managed as if they were inside of an Azure native environment. I kind of jumped ahead when I spoke to some of this, but as you see in the figure in the far left-hand side of the screen or far right-hand side, depends on where you're sitting. You could say this could be a potential hybrid environment. This is actually one of the steps, or even multi-cloud. this is one of the steps where I have not, and I've saved that just to give you an example of what that would look like when I divert to my dashboard. Here's an example of being able to extend my Defender for Cloud features over Arc into an environment that has Windows and Linux physical machines, as well as Windows and Linux virtual machines. Then I can actually provide some type of protection towards Kubernetes applications into a different environment at scale, or protect run data services anywhere, right? Or Azure data services, what I'm trying to say. With that, I'll go ahead and see if I can demonstrate or show you what I have already collected. I'm going to go back to Microsoft Defender for Cloud. This, and again, not to steal too much from Laura's part that she went into, or to go back and repeat it again. If I were to navigate under cloud security into workload protections, we'll probably see this dashboard again when we talk about other contexts related to Defender for Cloud. As you notice here, there is a VM that's in advanced protection. Lara mentioned something about cloud workload protections, correct? So this would be one of those enablements that's not a foundation feature. So this is when you start paying for features. Within workload protections, if I click on that just-in-time VM component, that means that from what I can do here, I can see VMs that have just-in-time access enabled, or I can also see what's actually not configured. And my whole point is showing you this is here's my Amazon instance, that Elastic Kubernetes instance that I have connected to. Now, there are some steps that have not been remediated yet. I have not connected Azure Arc to it. That would bring up the discussion of Azure Arc enable servers. So right now, I've got my Defender for Cloud security posture management features extended to it, but I have not done the other steps, and that is to enable Azure Arc to be able to provide some protection around that VM. So I just wanted to give you that example. Oh, and here is another virtual machine that's already been configured. I have just-in-time applied against it, given naming convention, 5G policy charging and rules function VM. But not that that matters. But nonetheless, this is just to give you an idea how that looks in that context. Since we're talking about what's Azure Arc, what can it do? Again, I can manage devices outside of an Azure native environment as if they were, such as a multi-cloud domain, and that would be AWS or GCP. In this instance, I've reached and I've extended those foundation features into Amazon Web Services, or I could also have the capability to do that in a hybrid, multi-cloud, or on-prem, same thing, environment, or obviously to provide some type of protection towards Internet of Things, of those devices that are out there on the edge, as they say. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Lara, and she'll talk about Microsoft Security Benchmark.
Great, thanks for that. So let's shift our gears back to cloud security posture management and discuss regulatory compliance with the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark. And this does have to do with Arc in a way, because Arc is all about expanding coverage to multi-cloud, and Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark is a multi-cloud compliance framework. So the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark is a set of best practices and recommendations for improving the security of workloads, data, and services on multi-cloud environments. We can go to the next slide, Serling. It was created from a range of sources, including the Cloud Adoption Framework, the Azure Well-Architected Framework, the CISO Workshop, as well as other industry and cloud service provider security standards and frameworks such as Center for Internet Security Controls, or CIS, and the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST. The Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark is a comprehensive multi-cloud security framework with over 180 AWS-specific checks, and it's meant to provide a single control framework to help our customers easily meet compliance across clouds while also ensuring consistency and alignment with the typical industry standards. We can go over to the next slide. So to actually monitor your compliance with the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark, you can use the regulatory compliance dashboard in Defender for Cloud. Here, Defender for Cloud is continuously assessing your hybrid environment for different sorts of standards, one being the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark that gets applied automatically, and then you can choose to apply other frameworks like CIS or PCI DSS. And you'll get a view of your overall compliance standing for any assigned standard with the same look and feel for both Azure and non-Azure platforms. To assign different compliance standards like CIS, like I mentioned before, you do have to use security policies. So we'll switch gears and talk a little bit about security policies now. So with security policies, when we're thinking of Azure, the recommendations in Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark all come from Azure policy definitions. Defender for Cloud automatically applies this initiative, and an initiative is a group of Azure policy definitions, and this gets applied to your onboarded subscriptions. We have different initiatives for different compliance standards. So we do have a specific security initiative for PCI DSS 3.2.1. Essentially, a security initiative is going to define the desired state configuration of your workloads and help you ensure that you're complying with the security requirements for your company or regulators. For any initiative, you can modify the policies, you can edit them. We can go over to the next slide as well, just to show this in more detail. So you're able to edit or modify the policies, make it fit your needs. You can add your custom initiatives as well. So you can create your own policies in Azure Policy, or you can use the built-in policies, group them all together into a security initiative. And you might be thinking, okay, that's really cool, but what is an Azure policy? So on the next slide, we have a security policy definition. So this is going to be a set of rules or guidelines that defines how an organization should manage and protect its resources. In Azure Policy, a policy definition is a rule that controls specific security conditions, such as what type of resources can be deployed or whether resources should require tags to be used. Policies can be created using the built-in definitions that Azure offers, or you can create custom policy definitions in a JSON format, and you can assign them through the Azure portal, PowerShell, or the command line. And you can enable and disable the policies, set different effects for the policies. So maybe for ensuring that your storage accounts have secure transfer enabled, you want to audit that. You don't want to make any sort of changes. You don't want to affect any deployed resources. So you would leave that in the audit effect. But if you want to prevent any resource from being created that doesn't have secure transfer enabled, then you can use the deny effect. And that will block the user from creating a storage account that doesn't enforce secure transfer. Defender for Cloud is mainly using audit policies by default, but you can modify the effects of different policies to have more proactive controls in place. And then the last slide in this section is just around role-based access control. So Defender for Cloud relies on Azure role-based access control, and there are two specific roles that come with Defender for Cloud. We have security admin and security reader. Security admins can assign security policies, they can view recommendations, and they can dismiss alerts. Security readers have full read-only access to any item in Defender for Cloud. The one thing that I want to point out here, because it is a common point of confusion, and I don't know who chose these naming standards, but I'd like to have a word with them. But security admin and security administrator are not the same. These are two different roles. Security administrator is going to be used for Microsoft 365 Defender, such as Defender for Endpoint or Defender for Office 365. And security admin is unique to Defender for Cloud. I know that isn't confusing at all, but just make sure you know that little caveat. So back to you, Sterling, to review what you can really do with these policies and how they can affect your secure score and recommendations experience in Defender for Cloud.
Thank you, Lara, for that in-depth review Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark. What's an initiative? What's the policy and the impact of it? Who can read it? That's important because now we need to understand how that even happens, right? What's the point in all that? Well, we have what we refer to within Defender for Cloud recommendations, right? So going back to the initial presentation that Lara had regarding cloud security posture management, initially your visualization at the overview page, I believe, in Defender for Cloud is just a secure score, right? That gives you an idea of where you stand. And then to the right of that, you also have a list of recommendations based on, maybe a previous scan. And if there's a deviation or something that doesn't comply, then you're going to be provided with an appropriate recommendation. In this particular slide on the right-hand side, or in pictured, I have a screen capture of a couple of different things going on. This is a collection of secure score recommendations, and to the right, you'll see that all recommendations is not highlighted. But at this point, what we've defined is this particular scan where this environment sits right now, that secure score is at 77%. Obviously, the goal, hopefully, is to get you at 100%. That means that there's probably some work that probably should be addressed inside of this environment based on what policies are there and based on what recommendations scanned and saw that there was something or some resources that were not compliant. The list under the name column are what we refer to as controls. Those controls enable you to go a little deeper into, some of the functionality, such as enable multi-factor authentication, securing management ports, to give you a better idea what that looks like from the dashboard and to go a little deeper into that. Let me bring that up again. And hopefully this visualization works for you guys. So if I were to navigate where I am now with inside the Defender for Cloud and the specific security blade recommendations, once it populates, so if I were to, this particular column, as I mentioned before, are your security controls. If I were to click on that, one of the examples I think was multi-factor authentication should be enabled on accounts with own permissions and subscriptions. But there was another one that I'd like to look at because it's tied to maybe a use case that we'll have coming up later on. Management ports should be closed on your virtual machines. So these are recommendations. If there was a resource that wasn't in compliance, then you would have the appropriate recommendation. And then there are steps to mitigate that, right? To bring that resource into compliance. Go back to my deck here. Just bear with me. Thank you. And that brings me into secure score. But before I go to secure score, excuse me, let me recap on recommendations. So recommendations are a result of the policies that Lara talked about. But that goes back to the capability of cloud security posture management, continuously scanning your environment for vulnerabilities. In the event it discovers that there is a resource that's not compliant, obviously there's going to be a recommendation. We call that hardening. I think Lara mentioned earlier on, it does a couple of things initially in terms of cloud security posture management, or CSPM, continuously assesses, right? Provides you visibility so that you can understand what's going on and enables you to harden your environment. Or how would I harden my environment? Where we're going to offer you, or Defender for Cloud is going to offer you a set of recommendations, right? That's how that plays together. Going back to the secure score, which helps you understand that. I kind of like stole some of my own thunder. A couple of things that it does. Eyes-on, high-level visualization of your current security situation. If this is your core responsibility as an administrator, a security administrator, obviously 78%, is that acceptable? And it's not in terms of Defender for Cloud, because our goal is to get you 100%. So obviously there is some work that probably needs to be done, right? But it also helps you improve that. And what we mean by proving that is getting it to maybe 100% or at 100%. Fairly straightforward and easy. Once that disparity, those deviations, what's not in compliance has been discovered, then you're giving instructions, step-by-step instructions within Defender for Cloud, how to remediate that. It's not a complex tool to use, because you can obviously use a quick fix solution, which enables you to almost automatically address that issue without having a real deep understanding of the underlying issue, or having their real deep into Defender for Cloud to explore and to try and fix it or to resolve the situation. I mentioned earlier on, there was a group of what we refer to as security controls. Here's an example of that. I expanded on that. I think the security control that I expanded on was securing management ports. The recommendations are grouped into security controls. Each control is a logical group. That logical group, when you expanded that, maybe if it's enabling multi-factor authentication, maybe there's multiple facets of that. Or when it comes to securing management ports, the one I particularly clicked on selected was management ports. A virtual machine that's used for, say, some type of external access. You have a multitude of management ports that are exposed to the public internet, everything from SSH all the way down to SNMP. So maybe it's kind of critical at one point or another to keep those ports closed. But again, I won't go into too much because Lara's going to expand on maybe those ports need to be used at times, and maybe there's a time and juncture where you need a user needs access. But nonetheless, the recommendations came about by looking at your standing policies and looking at resources that weren't in line with that, and said, oh, by the way, there are management ports. Here's a good example, exposed on this VM. I recommend the following, right? No pun intended, but that's how I got there. And yes, you have to remediate all the recommendations of that single resource. I'll go ahead and hand this over to Lara to dive into defining brute force attacks, which kind of hopefully wraps everything up that we've talked about so far with the capability of Defender for Cloud.
Yeah, let's go through this section. So brute force attacks, these are one of the most common attack types that we see in Defender for Cloud. It's a really common and effective method that attackers use to crack weak passwords using different sorts of automated processes to guess a username and password combination in a short period of time and eventually gain access to systems with little to no protection. When a hacker gains access to your system, so moving into this initial access phase that we were talking about in the MITRE attack framework earlier, so when they gain access, get into your virtual machine, server, on-prem, wherever it is, then the attacker can start to make different sorts of executions. They can steal data, maybe install malware, and just overall damage your system. So that's why it's really important to be more proactive, have strong passwords, and limit the number of login attempts. Also, you can use other measures offered by Defender for Cloud that we'll go into to really defend against brute force attacks and protect your network overall. Commonly, when brute force attackers try to execute these attacks, we can move on. They're going to target commonly used ports for management services. For example, port 22 is commonly used for secure shell management services, and port 3389 is used for remote desktop protocol or RDP management services. And if an attacker is scanning for open ports and they see one of these ports as being open, then they're going to try to target them because they would get access to a lot of high valued management capabilities. And so they'll target them and they'll try to guess passwords and gain unauthorized access to the system. We commonly see attacks over port 22 and 3389. I know whenever I'm doing a demo or testing something out for my product and I have a virtual machine that I just leave wide open at 3389 to see if I can get any sort of recommendations for it and just trigger some different findings in Defender for Cloud. Within like 5 minutes, it starts to get attacked and I start getting alerts for someone is trying to log into your system, someone like potential brute force attack detected. So it's definitely really common. It doesn't matter if you're using a demo tenant, if you're using your corporate tenant, attackers will find these machines and they'll try to get into them. There are different types of brute force attack programs that attackers can use that we'll talk about on the next slide. So Here we have password crackers, we have port scanners just to see where the open ports are. We have network mappers, web application scanners, SSH brute force tools, RDP brute force tools, FTP, which is file transfer protocol brute force tools, and other management port brute force tools. These can be used individually or in combination to truly launch a successful brute force attack on a target network or system. Brute force on a target system and get into your server in any sort of way, whether you're running an application on that server, they can run that web application scanner or whatnot, and truly just guess the passwords using the password crackers. So then when the brute force attack happens, Defender for Cloud is going to alert you, and we'll see that in the next slide. So it's going to give you an alert when it detects indications of a brute force attack, including extreme counts of failed sign-ins from unknown usernames and new authentications from multiple RDP connections or a new source IP address. And in addition to just detecting these brute force attacks, Defender for Cloud is also going to give you proactive recommendations to ensure that you're not using a public IP address, that you have MFA enabled, and you're not using common usernames like sysadmin for SQL servers that attackers are commonly going to use to try to get into your SQL servers and steal your data from there. We're also making sure you have password rules set up and that you're locking down your management ports as much as possible. And one way that we can help secure management ports is through something called just-in-time virtual machine access. So this is an advanced workload protection feature that's part of Defender for Servers, and it allows you to lock down inbound traffic to your virtual machines in Azure and in AWS to reduce exposure to threat actors that are actively scanning for accessible machines with open management ports, but it still lets users connect to the virtual machines when needed from specific IP addresses for a defined time interval, because we know there are valid use cases to have your management ports open for a short period of time, but we don't want you to leave those wide open forever. And that's why we created just-in-time virtual machine access. So this can be implemented on the next screen. We can see this from the workload protection blade in Defender for Cloud. There's also a recommendation that we saw earlier that says virtual machines should have just-in-time virtual machine access enabled. And for each virtual machine that you enable just-in-time access on, you can specify the ports, the protocols, the allowed source IPs or IP ranges, and the time period for which you want to open the port for. In Azure, when you enable just-in-time VM access, Defender for Cloud is going to create a deny all inbound traffic network security group rule for your selected ports in either the NSG rules, like I just said, or Azure Firewall Classic rules. These rules restrict access to your Azure virtual machines, the management ports on them, and they defend them against attacks. And then if any other rules exist on the selected ports, then those would take priority. So you do want to make sure that you don't have any sort of allow rules for port 3389 if you want to use just-in-time VM access for Azure. For AWS, it's a different story. So in AWS, enabling just-in-time access revokes the relevant rules in the attached Amazon EC2 security group, and it blocks inbound traffic on the specified ports that you assigned when you enable just-in-time VM access in the first place. Then when essentially what will happen is when a user requests access to a virtual machine, if they are in Azure first, I'll just quickly go through this. I know it doesn't line up to the slides, but just bear with me for a second. I just wanted to make this point clear. So when a user requests access to a virtual machine, Defender for Cloud is going to check that the user has permissions to that virtual machine, so they have contributor access to that virtual machine. When we check that, we are going to modify the network security groups or the Azure firewall to allow inbound traffic to flow through the selected ports from the relevant IP address that you defined when you created that just-in-time VM access rule for any sort of time period, so 1 to 3 hours. In AWS, Defender for Cloud is going to create a new EC2 security group that will allow the inbound traffic to the specified port for a specific time period. When that time expires, we're going to restore the security groups, but we're not going to interrupt the established connections. The same goes for Azure. We're going to restore the security groups to their original state without any interruption of users that are actively connecting to that machine. There is a Defender for Cloud recommendation to enable just-in-time VM access on your relevant machines. Any machine that doesn't have it configured is going to appear in the unhealthy resources. If they're in Azure, they'll appear if they don't have it enabled already, of course. If they have an assigned network security group or firewall rule that allows traffic over port 22, 3389, 5985, and 5986. And then in AWS, all of your virtual machines that don't have just-in-time access enabled and have security groups assigned to them that allow for management port connections from any IP address are going to be unhealthy in the recommendation to enable just-in-time access. So that's all I have there. Back to you, Serling, to walk us through an exercise.
Thank you, Lara. So hopefully just-in-time, Lara's presentation of just-in-time took us all the way back to MITRE, right? That became a result of alerts that Defender for Cloud acknowledged. And if it could have been a VM within one of the security controls, it was recommended that that VM, that those exposed management ports be closed, right? And I guess when you saw just in time, there was an automated demo, I think a couple of slides earlier on to kind of walk you through that process. The reason we didn't have it up in this demo, it takes a bit of time in excess of 30 minutes to instantiate that VM. Once it's been brought from inventory to just in time, that's why the lab environment or the presentation had to kind of remain static. But I did give you some examples of an inventory VM that did have just in time enabled, and then obviously my AWS EC2, Elastic Compute 2 that I have access to, but I have not gone to next step, and I would have to enable Azure Arc for that. So if you have access to your own personal subscription, these are some review type navigational exercises you can follow along. I won't bring up my dashboard, but having written this based off my dashboard, if you followed along with inside Defender for Cloud, and if you're not there yet, if you're just launching your dashboard, you get the main window. You can find your way up to the search bar with inside the Azure portal, and you can start to type in Defender for Cloud. That'll give you the icon or bring you actually to Defender for Cloud's overview page. So from there, now I'm going to maybe the third bullet point, you will go down to the management settings into environment settings. Things probably change if you sat through some of this type of training or overview maybe a couple months ago. The dashboard has had some navigational changes. So now we're going to be able to look at those cloud features by going into management. This is on the right-hand side of your dashboard. You would have Defender for Cloud and then the overview. Find your way down to the lower left-hand side if you're in front of your dashboard. Look for environment management, environment settings. And the whole point about that, when you click on environment settings, is where you're going to uncover your subscription. So you're going to, you would have to expand. You're more likely going to have to expand the subscription window so that you can actually click on your subscription. Because as Lara mentioned, these plans are tied to your subscription or at the subscription level. Once you click on that, you're able to, it should bring you to the Defender for Cloud plans review, excuse me, where you at the top, you probably see what's foundational for free, and then everything else that is for some type of a fee, right, for 30 days or so until that expires. After you do that, if you have been successful in doing that, I'm trying to imagine myself walking through the interface so I don't get ahead of myself. You would take yourself or navigate back to the general. We're still in the context of Defender for Cloud, right? But you're going to go back to general, and then I want you to go ahead and move over to recommendations. So this would be that dashboard. I'm visualizing you're looking at the main, if you will, dashboard or the main window for Defender for Cloud. And on the left-hand side, you have a number of blades there. Now, you don't have to do anything yet because visually, from a 35,000 feet view, you should be able to see your secure score in your environment or an environment with a given value in it. Just to the right of that, that would be your secure score value. Now, within that same area, you can take your point of reference down to recommendations. That's the next blade, if you will, recommendation status or recommendations. If you click recommendations, then on the right-hand side in that page, you can see the different type of recommendations or the recommendation status. And the point of interest that I'm trying to make here is look at the resource health. If you just hover over, take your mouse cursor and hover over resource health, you can get an idea. There's certain values and there's certain details regarding maybe there are policies that need to be enabled. Maybe there's a VM that has management ports exposed and things like that. And I'm just speaking from a high level overview because I'm not in my dashboard just yet. Something else that Lara spoke to was governance and in the way of regulatory compliance. So again, going back to Defender for Cloud, the main view, you should have an overview. Make your way down to where you would find cloud security. And inside cloud security, you're going to click on the regulatory compliance blade. Once you click that, by default, you should see, it should bring you to the compliance controls. Just above it, your focus should be on Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark. At least in my production environment, it defaults to Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark. The whole idea of this particular exercise is just to explore the different compliance controls. Now remember, we have don't get this confused with the recommended secure score security controls. These are compliance controls. If you expand on those compliance controls, you can get more details such as the network security, data protection, endpoint security. And again, that's just to give you an example of the underlying compliance recommendations associated with that network control. So the compliance control overall would be Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark. Then you have a measure of compliance controls to expand and secure and get more data on, such as I mentioned before, network security and so on and so forth. Once you've done that, you can navigate back to the main page of Microsoft Defender for Cloud, navigate down to security, cloud security, and then we're going to explore workload protection. So my navigation would be if I'm no longer in regulatory compliance, then I would simply, in that same left-hand column, if you will, I would find my way down to cloud security. Within cloud security, I'm going to click on workload protections blade. There you can review cloud coverage, security alerts, and advanced protection. As a matter of fact, if you recall, it was in workload protections, and it was specifically within advanced protection where I was able to visualize that I had a VM that needed to be addressed. There was an issue there. That was that one VM that I now had access to over in AWS, that it had some remediation requirements. I know right offhand, one of those was, by the way, you probably need to enable Azure Arc for this VM. There are management ports that probably need to be closed and the like, right? So hopefully, before we get into the knowledge check, starting from MITRE attack, working our way through cloud security posture management, workload protection, how that's all supported by a measure of governance. That governance is realized in the form of security initiatives and security policies. We talked about at a high level overview, two specific roles within Azure: security administrator and security reader that can either edit or only review. We talked about recommendations, right? Recommendations come forth as a result of scanning your environment and looking for deviations or resources. What's a resource? A virtual machine that's not in compliance, and then offering up a recommendation. Virtual machine 1.a, management ports are exposed, or so on and so forth. And now
Can we go into the portal, Sterling, before we go into the knowledge tech? Would you mind sharing your screen?
Absolutely.
I just want to take the audience through some other concepts because we do have some time. We might as well go it. So with Defender for Cloud, let's go to, oh, it doesn't look like there are any attack paths here, which is all good. But I did want to talk about attack path analysis because this is part of the Defender Cloud Security Posture Management Plan. And what we can do with attack path analysis is, rather than just giving you recommendations to say, you should remediate vulnerabilities on your virtual machine. Well, what does that mean? Because I have thousands of virtual machines with vulnerabilities, and I have different levels of vulnerabilities on those machines. How do I know which one is most important? And that's where attack path analysis can really come in to save the day, because it'll let you know, okay, you have this virtual machine that is exposed to the internet. It's not using just-in-time VM access. It's not locking the management ports down as expected. And it has high severity vulnerabilities that allow for remote code execution. And even more, maybe it has permissions to something else in your environment. Maybe it has permissions to a key or a managed identity. Maybe it has permissions to a storage account that contains sensitive information. That sort of insight is so valuable, and that's something that we can see with attack path analysis now. And that's brand new to Defender for Cloud. You can also write your own queries using something called the Cloud Security Explorer. So you can write queries to find out, do I have virtual machines that have a specific tag that would indicate that they're a production workload? And these also have high severity vulnerabilities. You can search for specific CVEs, so specific vulnerabilities on your machines. That way, you know if there's a log4j vulnerability that you have to resolve. Yeah, so I just wanted to point that out to y'all really quickly because we do have some time. So maybe there is some additional capabilities that we can go through in the portal.
So, well, did we talk about, we didn't specifically go into inventory, did we? It's one of those things that are offered, yeah. So I've got a host, again, this is my production environment, so it's limited. But as soon as I connected it to AWS, it kind of lit up. So as you can see, there's a number of AWS S3 bucket entries here, Defender for containers that are here within inventory. So this is out of the box. So, if I take it back to, how would my environment look out of the box, and what's covered from a foundation standpoint? Now, to be fair, I have enabled enhanced features because there is an Azure VM that is protected by just-in-time, right? But nonetheless, inventory is available. I'm able to look at what resources that are either protected or not protected, or whatever the case is, right? Larry, you can chime in here anytime you like. Inventory tended to stick out with me because my environment did not look like this until I connected it to AWS.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely going to light up when you start adding more workloads in and start having more vulnerabilities in those workloads. That's definitely when you're going to get the most value out of Defender for Cloud. Everything that you see here in this inventory view, it's all based on Azure Resource Graph as well. So you can even see that there's the option at the very top to open a query, which is going to open an Azure Resource Graph query just to display different sorts of insights from inventory. So you can always run your own queries here, download those results. You can use automated methods to consume those results. So maybe you have an Azure Logic app, which is a workflow automation tool that you run every day to get certain details about your security recommendations or alerts out of the portal and send them over to a central database. Maybe you want to create a Power BI dashboard from it or something along those lines. That's 100% available using Defender for Cloud, which is really great because it is very flexible in that method.
Something else I noticed once I connected my account to AWS, and I believe that was in, I have to think about this for a while, that's going to be in environment settings. And if I drill down to, this is my Azure root subscription, right? But if I expand AWS, there it is. It's connected, 4 to 4 plans. I just gave it this crazy name, Azure Arc 1 Alpha. But this is everything that's connected. That remember when we talked about Azure Arc initially, when you connect Defender for Cloud to AWS in this example, that you can extend those protections. Right now, what protections am I extending? My foundational protections. I know my cloud workload protection isn't extended because that requires additional access. As I mentioned before, I think I was attempting to test that particular component out earlier on. Let's see if it comes up. That's under getting started. And no. And I believe, no, I won't hold up, but we do have time. So I'm just trying to recall the specific scenario. But let's try this one more time. Let's go back to home. That's what I wanted to do. And there we are. Azure Arc, right? So able to do that, to add that, generate script, there was additional steps that I would have to facilitate in order to add that EC2 to Azure Arc and to manage it in Azure as if it was native to the environment, is my point, right? So that was one of those things that's still out there that needs to be addressed. But I thought I would leave it at that point so that you can actually see the workload itself. If I were to attempt right now to add this machine, it's not configured. Here's what's configured is according to just in time. That's interesting. It didn't come up right away. Here it is. So this is an Azure native machine. The status right now, it's protected by a network security group. I mean, Lara was speaking about this in quite detail. This machine at this point is not. And in order to do that, in order to even enable this, I have to enable just in time. I mean, just in time, but enable to do that, I need to enable Azure Arc for service for that to even manifest or be realized.
That's awesome. Thanks for showing us that. I think we can probably jump into the knowledge check now. What do you think?
Let's go for it. Sounds good to me.
Perfect. All right. So if you've been following along, we do have our knowledge check now. The first question we have is, which of the following isn't included in the Microsoft Defender for Cloud free tier? A, monitor IoT hubs and resources. B, monitor network access and endpoint security. C, monitor non-Azure resources. You can vote using the QR code or https aka.ms/polls, just aka.ms/polls is good enough. So you can go ahead and vote. We'll be monitoring the results, seeing who's voting, seeing who's getting it wrong. I see some coming in now. What do you think it is, Sterling? What are you going with?
You want to take the approach of deducing this. I mean, let's just start from the top. Why certain examples won't work? No. Let's just pick B, for example. Monitor network access and endpoint security. Can I get that with the foundation protection or subscription when by default?
Number A, did you say?
B. Monitor, yeah.
Well, you can get certain aspects of it
Okay. Okay.
because you are able to understand if you do have any sort of open management ports. We are going to give you a free recommendation saying that you have an exposed management port or you have a public IP address assigned to that machine or storage account or anything along those lines.
What about?
Um,
Go ahead.
no, that was it.
What about monitoring Internet of Things hubs and resources?
So that is something where we can provide recommendations. So that's going to be all around giving you recommendations. If you want more protection, then you can use a plan called Defender for IoT, which isn't in Defender for Cloud actually, but you can get some essential recommendations.
So there's that recommendations that I get default by the the Defender for Cloud continuously assessing the environment, coming up with something like a recommendation. I don't have to really pay for that, right? Initially.
Right.
Well,
And then the monitoring non-Azure resources, this is technically going to be the answer. I see a lot of people have voted, so we can move
yeah,
on.
got it.
This is technically the answer, but I do want to point out that even though this is the correct answer, we do include a free tier of Defender CSPM for it, which is foundational CSPM. We do include that for AWS and Google Cloud Platform, but you're not going to get any of the workload protection capabilities for those.
Yeah.
So you are able to monitor those non-Azure resources with CSPM only and the foundational capabilities. This question, maybe it's a little outdated, maybe it's a little confusing right now. We'll figure it out on our end, but you can get a free component for AWS and
Cool.
GCP. All right, the next question we have is an organization compliance group requires client authentication using Azure AD and Key Vault diagnostic logs to be enabled. What's the easiest way to accomplish it? Is it A, configure management groups, B, implement Microsoft Defender for Cloud policies, C, create desired configuration state scripts? Here, well, I know management groups isn't right for sure because management groups are used to organize different sorts of subscriptions in Azure in general. So I don't think that's going to be the right answer. C, desired configuration state scripts. I mean, I just don't really see how that's relevant to Defender for Cloud. And this is a knowledge check about Defender for Cloud. So if I'm really looking into this, I am going to probably go with B. What about you, Sterling?
I think that sounds right. I mean, you covered that earlier on, if they recall, right? So
Right.
let's give it a check.
Right.
Voila.
You can use an Azure policy to configure that Key Vault diagnostic logs should be enabled and they should be sending information to a log analytics workspace. And if you want to manage any sort of authentication using Azure Active Directory, you can also use Azure Policy for that. And Azure policies go into Microsoft Defender for Cloud as security policies.
Correct. Yep. Thank you.
All right, let's go to the next one. An organization is working with an outside agency that needs to access a virtual machine. There's a real concern about brute force login attacks targeted at virtual machine management ports. Which of the following can be used to open the management ports for a defined time range? Azure Firewall, Bastion Service, or just-in-time virtual machine access? If anyone gets this wrong, we didn't do a good job. Yeah. So we did talk a lot about this. I mean, Azure Firewall and Bastion Service, those are great ways to lock down management ports altogether. But as we know, there are going to be times where a user does need to connect to a virtual machine from a public IP address. through the management port. So there are some specific use cases where a user may need to get access. And in that case, the best thing to use will be C, just-in-time virtual machine access.
Awesome.
Great. All right. Next question. When using Defender for Cloud to provide visibility into virtual machine security settings, the monitoring system can be set up to notify administrators when issues are discovered. Which issue below would need a different monitoring tool to discover it? Is it A, a newer operating system is available? B, system security updates and critical updates are missing? Or C, disk encryption should be applied on virtual machines? So essentially, what can Defender for Cloud not monitor here? Right. So Defender for Cloud, we do vulnerability assessments of the operating system, but we're not going to necessarily tell you when you're using an outdated operating system version. We are going to tell you that your operating system has vulnerabilities and there are critical updates that are missing, but we're not necessarily going to say, okay, you should upgrade to this newer one, even though your previous one, the current one, doesn't have any sort of vulnerabilities. We're not doing that. And then an Azure policy that exists is to apply disk encryption on virtual machines. And that's something that we can add into Defender for Cloud to actually let you know that you're not using disk encryption. So we can monitor that. So the answer here would be A, newer operating system version is available. All right. So in summary, and we already wrapped this up pretty well, but we learned how we learned the MITRE attack framework, the most common types of cyber attacks. We learned how to configure Defender for Cloud, understand your security posture, review your secure score, raise it up, lock down your solutions and systems using Defender for Cloud recommendations, and protect yourself against brute force attacks by enabling just-in-time virtual machine access. So thank you all so much for joining. I had a great time talking to you all today, presenting, and I hope you got some value out of this session. Please feel free to review this Learn Module section. I think we have a slide for it next, just giving you the link again. And you can always get more information or resources at the link provided on this slide, which is aka.ms/AAJRR8. Is that an L or an I? Looks like an L.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, but we'll post that in the chat, so don't worry about that. Yeah, awesome. Great. So we can, is there any other slides? I think there might be a couple more. Yeah, just continue to review this Learn module, Learn Live-2023-0412A with aka.ms in front, which if you haven't realized by now, that's pretty much the short link for every Microsoft resource. And then the last slide we have, if you want to stay up to date and watch the rest of these Microsoft Secure sessions, we have this slide at the very end to tell you how to do that. So we have different QR codes that you can scan, or you can go to aka.ms/learnlive-microsoft-secure-2023. So don't miss these sessions. It was really nice to be able to present this, and I know we have other awesome presenters that are doing the same. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.